Hong Kong held elections this past week, and the initial reviews from the media on the Chinese mainland are none too favourable. That's because the results could be interpreted as the Hong Kong electorate trying to put the brakes on the advance of pro-Beijing interests there. Hong Kong's Legislative Council, or LegCo as it's called, will now welcome some of the youngest legislators the former British colony has ever seen, many of whom came of age politically during the so-called Umbrella Revolution back in 2014. That movement was out to stem the growing political influence of Beijing and the government on the mainland. Out of that same movement, a new generation of fledgling media outlets was born. The politics of those outlets are varied, but they have provided platforms for novice politicians, the kind of candidates that mainstream media have tended to ignore. Despite often being shut out of official engagements, shunned by the political establishment, those upstart outlets have now proven their potential to have a real impact on the debate and leave legacy media increasingly compromised by Beijing's influence behind. Our starting point this week is Hong Kong. They call Hong Kong a semi-autonomous state. That same term, semi-autonomous, can be applied to most of the mainstream news media based there. Ostensibly, they operate independently of Beijing. But on a story like this one, with two political movements pulling Hong Kong in different directions, one towards Beijing, the other away from it, the coverage makes semi-autonomous seem like a stretch.
Just like the Legislative Council itself, there are two sort of major camps in Hong Kong, pro-democracy or pro-Beijing. The pro-Beijing media covers the government's news so often from the government's point of view that it seems to be the government's mouthpiece in many cases, such as helping Hong Kong's leader getting its own re-election. But for the pro-democracy media in Hong Kong, the story will be a new generation of Hong Kong people wary of Beijing's control in Hong Kong have got into power.
Different media outlets carry different messages. For example, pro-establishment media all say things like how the pro-establishment camp is successful in maintaining the number of seats, or how the independence camp does not seem to have too many legislators. They say whatever is convenient for them.
These Legislative Council elections were the first since politics in Hong Kong were shaken by the Umbrella Revolution 2 years ago, when Beijing announced electoral reforms, measures that activists in Hong Kong saw as restrictive, further eroding Hong Kong's semi-autonomy. Those activists took to the streets. Borrowing a page from the global Occupied movement, the demonstrators stayed on the street for 4 months. It was then and there that the foundation was laid for the way this election campaign would be fought online.
Occupied movement unleashed a lot of energy. People want expression, and so digital is one way to do it. And that coupled with the disappointment, dissatisfaction with traditional media. So people said, hey, I'll create my own.
The internet has really taken over as the major forum. We look at the debates, we cut out 2 minute, 3 minute cuts, and we post it. Now people won't sit there and listen for 2 hours, but they will watch you for 2 minutes. And I think that is why the younger radicals, are taking the more or less center stage.
The new generation of politicians, they are digital natives. It's second nature for them to use digital media. For instance, Eddie Chu, who won more than 80,000 votes, produced good number of short videos, including one who's widely circulated called Mr. Fox. To send a message. And they have a way of storytelling that's compelling and that people can relate to.
Not that the new media upstarts have had this story to themselves. Over the past few years, Beijing's fingerprints have been left all over mainstream papers in Hong Kong, such as the South China Morning Post and Ming Pao. Both publications appointed new editors, and their subsequent shifts in editorial direction, both are now more in line with what newspapers on the mainland publish, has led to criticism and the loss of reporting staff. And there are also those with a pro-Beijing point of view, like Robert Chow of HKG Pao, taking their new media news platforms online.
60 years ago, the media is all owned by pro-Taiwan businessmen, mainly. Pro-British, pro-Taiwan. Nowadays, Hong Kong has changed over, so you would have more media owners who are pro their own government, pro-China. That's to be expected. You have press moguls who decide to run newspapers, TV, and then put their dirty hands into politics, right? But with internet, anybody can do it.
In Hong Kong newspapers, once there are some new pro-Beijing figures appointed to be the editorial officials, there is a very interesting split between the editorial side and the reporting side. So the management and the lower level reporting side of media outlets are completely different worlds.
However, only one of those worlds is reflected on the television side. There was a channel, ATV, that leaned toward the pro-democracy movement until it was bought out by a mystery owner from the mainland and shut down earlier this year. TVB remains on the air, but its critics like to call it CCTVB, after Beijing's state-owned broadcaster. The pro-Beijing side took a hit in these elections, despite holding the upper hand on the airwaves and in print.
Powerful figures in the traditional media tend to think in an old-fashioned way. They think that as long as they can control the mainstream press, they can prove their value to Beijing. When they see that new media outlets have influence on the election results, they have to explain this to Beijing. We have less resources, but we are resourceful in our own way. When it comes to the world online, both camps are still able to compete against each other, just like that.
It is rather difficult to be absolutely neutral in Hong Kong right now because the political split is really big. You can't really have a neutral point of view by having people stating something neutral. What you can do is to include as many viewpoints as possible, be honest, and let the readers decide whether this is the whole truth in Hong Kong or are you missing something.
One of the things missing in Hong Kong and in the coverage is what's known as the middle ground. A number of new players in the Hong Kong media scene are providing alternatives to the mainstream news media there. Here are some of the outlets making an impact. For just over a year, the Hong Kong Free Press has sought to, quote, bridge the gap between Chinese and English reporting in and about Hong Kong, a counter to the restrictions and self-censorship which are increasingly stifling the local media. HKFP also keeps a close eye on press freedom issues. Among the media outlets pushing for an empowered local political scene, Post 852 was formed by former print journalists frustrated by editorial compromises their papers were making as a result of Beijing's influence. Volunteer-funded outlets like Post 852 are picking up the page views that are being dropped by the mainstream news media. On the pro-Beijing side, Speak Out Hong Kong was launched by supporters of Hong Kong's chief executive, C.Y. Leung. It has a sizable following on Facebook and has used that platform to mobilize pro-Beijing protests. Finally, there's TV Most. The online channel began with parodies of a pro-Beijing broadcaster. Now it's branching out into mini documentaries and interviewing influential figures on sensitive issues.